I've decided to start a new life without you. The words sliced through the elegant dining room of the upscale restaurant like a knife. We were there to celebrate my daughter's college graduation. Yet Nathan, my husband of 28 years, had chosen that moment to destroy the illusion of our family. He stood with his champagne glass still raised, his declaration replacing the toast he was supposed to make in honor of Lila's achievements. The room fell silent. The clinking of silverware ceased. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Before we continue, if you believe no one should ever sacrifice their loyalty only to be betrayed, make sure to subscribe. It's completely free, and it helps us bring you more powerful stories like Avery's. Now let's uncover how she responds when her husband shatters her trust in the most public way. 50 pairs of eyes swiveled between Nathan and me, waiting for a reaction. Waiting for tears, for outrage, for the dramatic exit everyone assumed was coming. But I didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I smiled. "Congratulations on your honesty," I said calmly, my voice even and steady. "My name is Avery Caldwell. I am 54 years old." Until that moment, I had played my role as devoted wife and mother perfectly. I had been the woman who sacrificed, who held the family together, who placed her own ambitions on hold to fuel her husband's dreams. For nearly 3 decades, I stood behind Nathan as he stumbled through 3 failed business ventures, 2 dramatic career changes, and countless phases where he claimed he was finding himself. Meanwhile, I raised our daughter Lila, who was seated beside me now. She was still wearing her graduation cap, her face pale and frozen in horror at her father's betrayal. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone shifting uncomfortably at a table in the back. It was Sienna Wells, Nathan's much younger girlfriend. She had been bold enough to attend this celebration, bold enough to sit with people I had once considered lifelong friends. The same friends who apparently knew about the affair but never thought to warn me. Sienna had smiled in my home during Christmas parties. She had called me for advice about her career. She had pretended to respect me while carrying on with my husband behind my back. My jaw clenched, but I kept my composure with a deliberate calmness that came from months of preparation. I reached into my handbag. My fingers closed around a cream-colored sealed envelope. I pulled it out, placed it carefully beside Nathan's plate, and straightened my posture. "What's this?" he asked, his triumphant expression faltering as his eyes darted toward the envelope. "Something for you to read later," I said evenly, then I turned to my daughter. Lila's face had gone pale. Her lips parted but no sound coming out. I kissed her cheek softly. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. This day is still about your accomplishment." My words trembled with restrained emotion, but I refused to let my voice crack. Then I stood, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and faced our stunned audience. "Please enjoy your meal. I wish you all a lovely afternoon." I walked out of the restaurant, my head held high. Behind me, I could feel 50 pairs of eyes locked on my back, stunned and speechless. The heavy door closed with a dull thud, shutting out the hushed murmurs that had just begun. The humid Augusta summer air enveloped me the second I stepped outside, pressing against my skin like a heavy blanket. And yet, for the first time in years, I could breathe freely. I hadn't made a scene. I hadn't given Nathan the satisfaction of humiliating me in front of our friends. What he didn't realize yet was that I had been planning for this day far longer than he had. Moments later, the restaurant door burst open behind me. I heard the slam echo across the pavement, followed by Nathan's voice, no longer confident but panicked and shrill. "Avery, what the hell is this? What have you done?" I kept walking, allowing myself a small smile. He would discover soon enough. The envelope I had placed beside his plate contained the beginning of my revenge, my carefully constructed plan, crafted over months of quiet preparation. For years, I had been the practical one in our marriage, the stabilizer. Nathan was the dreamer, always chasing the next big thing. While I kept our family afloat, I was the one who saved for Lila's education when Nathan foolishly invested in his friend's failing restaurant. I was the one who took extra hours at Trevanta Corporation, balancing spreadsheets and managing corporate finances, while Nathan's midlife crisis led him to quit his stable job and throw himself into a short-lived passion for selling handcrafted furniture. That dream lasted exactly 6 months before he grew bored. My own dream, opening a financial consultancy designed specifically to empower women, was always postponed. After Lila graduates, I told myself. After Nathan finds stability. But Nathan never found stability. 3 months ago, I noticed discrepancies in our joint accounts. Small transfers to an unfamiliar account. I had managed our finances for 20 years. Nothing slipped past me. These weren't random mistakes. They were red flags that I could have confronted him right away. But something stopped me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the emotional distance that had been growing between us for months. Instead, I began to quietly investigate. What I uncovered was worse than I imagined. Nathan had been funneling money systematically to a separate account for over a year. He was wining and dining Sienna in expensive restaurants, showering her with jewelry, even touring beachfront properties with her, all while telling me we needed to tighten our belts for retirement. The final blow came when I discovered text messages on his phone one afternoon, after he carelessly left it unlocked. Messages between Nathan and Sienna. Messages about their new life together. Messages about how he was finally breaking free. Messages outlining their exact plan. The day after Lila's graduation, Nathan would leave me. But Nathan underestimated me. I had been a financial professional for 30 years. I knew how to follow money trails, how to trace hidden assets. And most importantly, I remembered the prenuptial agreement we had signed nearly 3 decades ago. Back then I had family money. He insisted on a prenup to protect his future earnings. Ironically, that very document contained a fidelity clause. A clause that would become his undoing. While Nathan was dreaming of escape, I was preparing my case. I consulted attorneys. I documented every hidden transfer. I gathered evidence of the affair. I drafted divorce papers. And I timed everything perfectly. I knew Nathan wouldn't dare disrupt Lila's final semester of college. He would wait until after graduation to make his move, hoping to avoid looking like the villain. What he didn't expect was that I would file divorce papers that very morning. Before he even opened his mouth at the restaurant, he thought he was orchestrating a grand exit. But I had already set the stage for his downfall as I stepped into the blazing afternoon sun. Leaving the echoes of gasps and whispers behind, I felt lighter than I had in years. The game had only just begun. And Nathan didn't even know he had already lost. I didn't return to the restaurant. The whispers, the sideways glances, the pitying looks. I had no intention of giving them any more theater to dissect. Instead, I walked with purpose toward my car and slid into the driver's seat, closing the door on all the noise behind me. For the first time in years, I felt an odd sense of liberation. Nathan believed he had staged the perfect performance, but he was an amateur actor on a stage I had built. I started the engine and drove toward our home, a stately colonial-style house nestled in Augusta's historic district. We had purchased it 15 years ago when Nathan's second business venture seemed to be succeeding. Of course, that business had eventually failed, like all the others, but the house had remained. The irony was not lost on me. This very home, the one Nathan had already promised to Sienna in his text messages, still belonged to me. When I pulled into the driveway, the facade looked unchanged: white shutters, neatly trimmed hedges, the porch swing where Nathan and I had once sat, dreaming about retirement. But as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the air felt different. He had poisoned the space with his betrayal. I moved through the familiar rooms slowly. Family photos hung along the hallway. Lila as a toddler in her Halloween costume, Nathan holding her proudly at her high school graduation, all 3 of us smiling during a family trip to Charleston. The images were lies now, still frames from a performance Nathan had never truly believed in. The living room looked untouched. The antique grandfather clock that had belonged to my father still ticked with stubborn constancy. The leather couch, worn from years of use, still slouched in its usual place. Yet I felt no comfort in any of it. I walked upstairs and opened the closet in the master bedroom. As I had suspected, Nathan's clothing was already packed. 2 large suitcases sat hidden at the back, zipped and ready for his grand escape. I laughed softly under my breath. He had always been meticulous about appearances. His tailored suits hung perfectly pressed, his ties organized by color, but careless about the things that actually mattered. He had planned to walk out tomorrow, leaving me blindsided, humiliated, discarded. But Nathan had never understood who he was married to. My phone buzzed insistently in my handbag. Dozens of messages appeared on the screen. Friends from the restaurant asking if I was all right, some trying to fish for gossip, Lila's frantic texts, even one from Nathan's sister, Clara Caldwell, who had flown in for the graduation. I ignored most of them. I responded only to Lila. "I'm okay. This isn't your burden to carry. Enjoy your graduation day. We'll talk tonight. I love you." I had protected her from the truth for months. She had worked so hard to finish her senior year. And I refused to let Nathan's betrayal overshadow her achievement. She would be angry with me for keeping it secret, but she would understand eventually. Lila had inherited Nathan's charisma but also my practicality, a powerful blend that had already carried her far. She had graduated with honors, a fact that made me prouder than anything else I had accomplished. 3 months earlier, I had first noticed the red flags in our finances. Tiny transfers to an unfamiliar account, amounts small enough that Nathan must have thought I wouldn't notice. But I had been managing money professionally for decades. I could spot an anomaly from a mile away. At first, I thought it might be a mistake. Then instinct told me otherwise. I began tracing every movement of our joint accounts. The picture that emerged was damning. Nathan had been siphoning money for over a year, slowly building a financial life separate from me. He used those funds to wine and dine Sienna, to buy her jewelry, to look at beachfront properties. Meanwhile, he had told me that we needed to cut back, that retirement planning required sacrifice. I worked extra hours. I said no to vacations. I told Lila she'd have to apply for scholarships. And all the while, Nathan had been playing house with another woman. The worst came the day I picked up his phone when he left it unlocked on the counter. The messages were clear, intimate, and brutal. They weren't just talking about romance, they were planning logistics. After Lila's graduation, one text from Nathan read, "I'll tell Avery it's over. A public setting is better. She won't make a scene." Another message from Sienna. "And she has no idea about the money?" Nathan's reply, "None. Avery trusts me completely. That's her weakness." I had nearly dropped the phone then. The words seared themselves into my memory, playing on repeat every night as I lay awake beside the man plotting my public humiliation. But Nathan's arrogance had also given me the weapon I needed. He had forgotten the prenuptial agreement. 28 years earlier, when I had more family money than him, he had insisted on a prenup to protect his future wealth. He had been so proud of it, certain it was his shield. What he failed to remember was Section 12, the fidelity clause. It stipulated that if either spouse engaged in infidelity, the wronged party would retain the majority of marital assets, including real estate and retirement accounts. The clause remained active for the duration of the marriage. While Nathan schemed, I consulted attorneys. Richard Hayes, my lawyer, walked me through every step. We gathered evidence of financial deception, documented every transfer, compiled photographs and screenshots of the affair. When I slid the sealed envelope beside Nathan's plate today, it contained not just divorce papers but an arsenal of carefully organized evidence. I timed it perfectly. I wanted to protect Lila's graduation, not spoil it. So I waited until that very morning to file. The papers were already lodged in the courthouse, out of Nathan's reach but ready to crush him. He thought his announcement would blindside me, but in truth I had already detonated the bomb beneath his feet. As I sat on the edge of the bed now, looking at Nathan's packed bags, I felt no grief, just clarity. This was no longer a partnership. This was a chess match, and I had already positioned my queen. 3 hours later, the sound of Nathan's car pulling into the driveway broke the silence. The slam of the front door rattled the picture frames on the wall. "Avery!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. "Where are you?" I was in the living room, laptop open, calmly reviewing the documents I had already secured. When he stormed in, his face was flushed, the envelope crushed in his fist, his composure shredded. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, waving the papers. "You served me with divorce papers today, of all days." I closed the laptop and folded my hands on my lap. "I thought it aligned nicely with your plans," I said coolly. You wanted to start your new life. I'm simply helping facilitate the transition. His mouth opened, fury spilling out. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted, my voice sharp and steady. Just as you had every right to choose Sienna. We all live with our choices, Nathan. He smirked suddenly, regaining some false confidence. The prenup expired years ago. Any lawyer will tell you that. I allowed myself a small smile. Actually, it didn't. Section 12 specifically states that the fidelity clause remains in effect for the duration of the marriage. Your lawyer should have explained that to you. Oh wait, you didn't consult one, did you? The color drained from his face. For the first time I saw fear. Nathan Caldwell, the man who believed he was orchestrating my humiliation, had just realized he was already trapped. Nathan's smug expression wavered as my words sank in. His grip tightened on the envelope, the paper crinkling under the pressure of his fist. You're bluffing, he muttered, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. No court would honor that clause after so many years. I leaned back against the sofa, calm and deliberate. I wouldn't bet on that, Nathan. You see, while you were playing games, I was building a case. And unlike you, I don't gamble with things I can't afford to lose. His jaw worked furiously, but before he could speak again, I picked up my phone from the coffee table. My thumb slid across the screen, and the familiar recording app opened. I tapped one file and let the sound fill the silence of the room. After the graduation, I'll tell her it's over, Nathan's own voice declared confidently. A public setting is better. She won't make a scene in front of everyone. Then came Sienna's voice, smooth and conspiratorial. And she has no idea about the money? Nathan again, smug and certain, none. Avery trusts me completely. That's her weakness. The blood drained from his face as the final word echoed through the living room. You recorded us? He shouted, panic flickering behind his anger. That's illegal. Not in Georgia, I replied evenly. When one party consents. And certainly not in your own home. I didn't record your private moments with Sienna. Believe it or not, I'm not cruel. I only recorded your conversations about defrauding me. He staggered back a step, his hand trembling. You set me up. No, Nathan, I corrected coldly. You set yourself up. I just documented it. His agitation grew. He paced the room, running a hand through his thinning hair. I need to make some calls, he muttered. Of course, I said, rising gracefully. Your attorney might be a good place to start. I'll be staying at Clara's tonight. At the mention of his sister's name, Nathan's head snapped up. Clara, he sputtered. Why would you? What does she? She's been aware of this longer than you think, I interrupted smoothly. She was the one who first spotted you and Sienna together last Christmas. She confronted you, Nathan. Remember? You told her it was nothing, just a harmless friendship. You promised her it would end. But when she realized you hadn't kept that promise, she came to me. The revelation struck like a blow he hadn't anticipated. For years, Nathan assumed his sister would take his side no matter what. He had underestimated Clara's loyalty to me, to her niece, and to the truth, his face twisted with disbelief. Everyone's betraying me, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Ironic, isn't it? I said softly. You wanted a grand exit, Nathan. Instead, you've been outplayed at every turn. I retrieved the small overnight bag I had packed earlier and slung my purse over my shoulder. You have until tomorrow evening to remove your belongings from this house. After that, the locks will be changed. He stared at me, stricken, as though he couldn't quite grasp that I was no longer pleading, no longer smoothing over his messes like I had done for nearly 3 decades. The balance of power had shifted, and he knew it as I walked toward the door. His voice cracked with desperation. What about Lila? Have you even thought about how this will affect her? I stopped, anger finally breaking through my calm facade. Slowly, I turned to face him. Don't you dare use our daughter as a shield. You weren't thinking about her when you siphoned our money to impress your mistress. You weren't thinking about her when you promised Sienna our home. And you certainly weren't thinking about her when you plotted to humiliate me at her graduation celebration. The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen and groaned. Problem? I asked coolly. He rubbed his forehead. Sienna's already at the apartment. She's moved her things in. I couldn't help the laugh that bubbled from my throat. The apartment you put in both your names? The lease you signed last month. Yes, he admitted, confusion clouding his features. You might want to check with the leasing office, I said, my tone razor sharp. That application was flagged for credit issues and never completed. The agent called our home phone to verify information. I handled it myself. The color drained from his face yet again. His perfectly constructed fantasy was unraveling strand by strand, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I opened the front door, letting the warm evening air spill inside. You always underestimated me, Nathan. That was your fatal mistake. Without another word, I walked out, leaving him to confront the wreckage of his so-called new life. Clara's house was a cozy bungalow on the other side of town, just blocks away from the university where she taught literature. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already waiting on the porch. She hurried down the steps as I got out of the car and wrapped me in a fierce embrace. I just heard from Lila, she said urgently, pulling me inside. Are you okay? Better than I expected, I admitted, following her into the kitchen. A bottle of wine was already open on the counter, 2 glasses waiting. Clara poured generously. I never thought Nathan would make such a spectacle, she said darkly. To announce it in front of everyone at the restaurant, during Lila's graduation celebration, he's lost his mind. It was meant to humiliate me, I explained, accepting the glass. A public rejection, so I wouldn't be able to fight back without looking hysterical. Clara shook her head. Her lips pressed into a tight line. My brother always did have a flair for drama, but this is beyond anything I imagined. We settled in her sunroom, surrounded by potted plants and overflowing bookshelves. Clara had never married, choosing instead a life of independence and scholarship. Over the years, I had sometimes envied her freedom, her ability to make choices without being tethered to a man's whims. What exactly did you put in that envelope that rattled him so badly? Clara asked, her eyes sharp with curiosity. I told her everything. The divorce filing, the financial records I had uncovered, the evidence of the affair, and most importantly, the prenuptial agreement that would strip Nathan of far more than he had anticipated. Clara's eyebrows lifted. Then a slow smile spread across her face. The prenup, she said. I remember when he insisted on it. Our father had just given him money for his first business, and Nathan was obsessed with protecting it. He thought he was being clever. Her smile turned bitter. The irony is delicious. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Lila. I drew a steadying breath before answering. Mom, she said immediately, her voice trembling with strain. I'm coming over to Aunt Clara's. Honey, you don't have to. I'm already on my way, she interrupted. Dad is telling everyone you've lost your mind. He says you've been planning this for months. He's saying horrible things. Of course he was. Nathan had always been skilled at rewriting narratives to cast himself as the victim. He had weaponized perception for years. Let him talk, I said firmly. The truth will become clear soon enough. As I ended the call, Clara reached over and squeezed my hand. You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. I nodded, my jaw set. And that strength is exactly what he's about to face. 20 minutes later, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed across Clara's porch. Before I could rise from my chair, Lila burst through the door, still in her graduation dress. Her makeup was smudged from crying, her hair slightly disheveled from the humid evening air. She looked like the child I used to comfort after nightmares, not the young woman who had just walked across a stage to receive her diploma. She rushed into my arms, clutching me tightly. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice cracked against my shoulder. Thick with betrayal and confusion, I stroked her hair, holding her the way I once did when she was 5. I didn't want to ruin your final semester, I said softly. You worked so hard for today. I wanted you to have this moment without carrying the weight of your father's choices. She pulled back, her eyes wet and fierce. Well, he ruined it anyway. He took care of that. Her words pierced me, a reminder that no matter how carefully I had planned, Nathan had still found a way to taint what should have been the proudest day of her life. Clara gestured for us to sit in the living room. Lila slumped onto the couch, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I sat beside her, steadying my voice. You deserve the truth now. Over the next half hour, I laid everything out for her. How I had discovered the irregular transfers in our accounts. How Nathan had been secretly siphoning money for over a year. How Sienna was involved, not just as his mistress but as his co-conspirator in planning a new life together. And how Nathan had timed his announcement to follow her graduation, thinking it would shield him from my retaliation. Lila listened in stunned silence, occasionally shaking her head as though to chase away the images forming in her mind. When I finished, she exhaled shakily. I knew something was wrong, she admitted. He's been different, distracted, always on his phone. But I never thought. Her voice broke. I never imagined it was this. None of us want to imagine these things about the people we love, Clara said gently, her voice filled with sympathy. But sometimes reality leaves us no choice. Before Lila could respond, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Richard Hayes, my attorney. I opened it quickly, scanning the words. The emergency filing has been approved. All identified accounts are now frozen, pending divorce proceedings. Relief washed through me like a tide. I turned the phone to show Clara and Lila. The accounts are frozen. He can't touch them now. Lila's eyes widened. Good. He deserves it after what he's done. Her loyalty warmed me, though I knew I had to temper it. He's still your father, I reminded her softly. Your relationship with him will always be separate from what's happening between us. She shook her head, bitterness flashing across her face. Maybe someday, but right now I can't even look at him. He hugged me this morning and told me how proud he was of me. And all along, he was planning to blow up our family a few hours later. My heart broke for her, but before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Clara rose to answer it, her cautious steps echoing down the hallway. Moments later she returned, her face troubled. It's Nathan, she said grimly. And he's not alone. I drew in a deep breath, steeling myself as Clara ushered Nathan and Sienna into the room. Sienna looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. She was 37, 17 years younger than me, with glossy shoulder-length blonde hair and the kind of polished confidence that came from never having faced true hardship. Nathan, in contrast, radiated fury. His earlier desperation had hardened into anger, his voice sharp and commanding as he spoke. Avery, you need to stop this insanity, he demanded, ignoring Clara, ignoring our daughter. Unfreeze the accounts. We can discuss this like reasonable adults. Before I could respond, Lila stood abruptly, positioning herself slightly in front of me as if to shield me. Her voice trembled but held remarkable strength. Maybe you should have tried being reasonable before announcing to 50 people that you were leaving Mom. On my graduation day. Nathan's eyes widened, clearly taken aback that Lila had spoken. He blinked as though just noticing her presence. Lila, this doesn't involve you. Her incredulous laugh cut through the air. Doesn't involve me? You blew up our family in front of all my friends and relatives on my graduation day. And it doesn't involve me. Sienna touched Nathan's arm tentatively. Greg, maybe we should go. He shook her off violently. No. I'm not leaving until Avery agrees to be rational. Clara folded her arms, her expression steely. My sister-in-law seems to be the only rational one here. You're the one who created this mess, Nathan. I stayed seated, watching the scene unfold with measured detachment. For years, I had been the peacemaker, the mediator who smoothed over conflicts to keep everyone happy. That role had exhausted me. And now, I had set it down for good. The accounts will remain frozen until the preliminary hearing, I said calmly. That's in 3 days. The judge will determine the division of assets at that time. 3 days. Nathan sputtered, his face turning red. What am I supposed to do for 3 days? You still have your personal account, I reminded him evenly. The one you've been funneling money into for over a year. That should be sufficient. Sienna's head whipped toward Nathan, her eyes wide with suspicion. You have a separate account? With how much in it? The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. It was clear she had not been fully informed of his financial maneuvering. Cracks were already forming in their united front. Nathan ignored her question, his face contorted with rage. This is vindictive, Avery. This isn't you. Perhaps you never really knew me, I replied coolly. Just as I never truly knew you. Lila turned on Sienna then, her voice laced with contempt. Did you know he was going to announce it like that? In front of everyone? At my graduation celebration? Sienna flushed, shame flickering in her expression. I thought, she stammered. I thought he was going to talk to your mother privately. The announcement today. It was unexpected. Nathan shot her a venomous look, the betrayal clear in his eyes. Their alliance, so carefully constructed, was already fraying under the weight of reality. I think you both should leave, Clara said firmly, stepping between us. You've upset Lila enough for one day. Nathan turned back to our daughter, his tone softening in a manipulative attempt to regain ground. Lila, you understand that relationships change, don't you? Sometimes people grow apart. Her face hardened in a way I had never seen before. What I understand, she said, her voice trembling with fury, is that you're a coward. You couldn't even give Mom the dignity of a private conversation. You were stealing from our family, while I was working 2 jobs to help pay for my textbooks because you said money was tight. Nathan's face paled. That's not how it was. It's exactly how it was, Lila cut him off. Please leave, Dad. I can't look at you right now. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Sienna seemed shaken by Lila's words. Finally, Nathan turned, his shoulders stiff with anger, and strode toward the door. Sienna trailed behind him, her expression clouded with doubt, to the doorway. Nathan paused and looked back at me, his voice low and venomous. This isn't over, Avery. I'll fight you on this. I met his gaze steadily, unflinching. You're welcome to try. The door shut behind them with finality, leaving the 3 of us in heavy silence. Lila collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. I've never talked to Dad like that before, she whispered, her voice breaking. That I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Sometimes standing up for what's right is painful, I murmured. Clara reappeared with fresh glasses of wine. She lifted hers in a quiet toast. To new beginnings. I raised mine, my mind steady and resolute. Indeed, I thought. This ending was only the beginning of something entirely new. The preliminary hearing took place 3 days later in a small wood-paneled courtroom on a gray and rainy Tuesday morning. The skies outside mirrored the tension inside my chest, but I walked into the courthouse with my head high. At my side was Richard Hayes, my attorney, steady and unflappable. He carried a leather briefcase filled with documents that represented months of my quiet preparation. Nathan, on the other hand, looked harried and disheveled. His suit, once perfectly tailored, sagged slightly, and there were deep shadows under his eyes. He had hastily retained a lawyer, a young associate from a corporate law firm with little experience in family matters. It was a poor choice, but it reflected Nathan's panic. He had always been impulsive, and now it was costing him dearly. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a voice that brooked no nonsense, began by reviewing the prenuptial agreement. She lifted her glasses, reading aloud. This document appears to be in order. Counsel, do you contest its validity? Nathan's attorney cleared his throat nervously. Your Honor, we believe the agreement has expired due to the length of time that has passed. The judge flipped to a section, her eyes scanning quickly. Then she read. Section 18 clearly states that the duration of this contract is for the term of the marriage plus any legal proceedings resulting from its dissolution. There is no expiration date indicated. Nathan leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorney, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice clipped, the evidence of systematic fund transfers appears to violate the financial disclosure requirements in Section 23. These transfers will remain under investigation. She shuffled through the documents, then looked directly at Nathan's lawyer. I am ruling to maintain the freeze on joint accounts pending full financial discovery. Mr. Caldwell's personal account will remain accessible to him for basic living expenses. The family home will remain in Mrs. Caldwell's possession during proceedings, as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause. Nathan's face flushed crimson. He muttered something under his breath, loud enough for me to hear. This is outrageous. The judge snapped her gaze at him. Mr. Caldwell, I strongly suggest you review the agreement you signed. This court will reconvene in 30 days for a full hearing after discovery is complete. The gavel struck, signaling the end of the session as Richard and I exited the courtroom. Nathan hurried after us, his footsteps echoing sharply in the hallway. Avery, he called, his voice thick with desperation. Please, we need to talk about this reasonably. 28 years together has to count for something. I stopped, turning to face him. His eyes were wild, darting, searching for sympathy. But I felt none. It counted for everything, I said quietly, until you decided it didn't. And then I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the courthouse corridor. Clutching at the ruins of his once carefully constructed life, word spread quickly through our social circle. Friends who had toasted us at anniversaries and shared vacations now whispered about Nathan's dramatic announcement at Lila's graduation party. Some called me daily, offering support. Others reached out with thinly veiled curiosity, eager for gossip. I chose dignity. Nathan and I are separating, I told anyone who asked. These things happen. I offered no details, no explanations. I let Nathan's actions speak for themselves. Meanwhile, Nathan's image began to crumble. 4 years he had cultivated the persona of the successful businessman, the devoted husband, the charming family man. But the cracks were now visible to everyone. He couldn't maintain the illusion when the accounts were frozen, when the whispers of betrayal traveled faster than truth. The financial freeze meant he couldn't follow through on the promises he had made to Sienna. The beachfront property they had been eyeing slipped through their fingers. The luxury car he had placed a deposit on had to be canceled. 2 weeks after the hearing, Clara called me one evening, her voice tinged with something between satisfaction and disbelief. Have you heard the latest? She asked. I smiled faintly. I can guess. But go on. Sienna moved out. Already. I wasn't entirely surprised, but the speed impressed me. Clara chuckled bitterly. Apparently, she discovered Nathan's business isn't doing as well as he claimed. The substantial savings he bragged about don't exist. She told her friend Jennifer that she didn't sign up to date a man with financial problems. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was tinged with irony. He always was good at creating illusions. I suppose she finally saw through them. While Nathan's world unraveled, I was rebuilding mine. The financial security I had carefully maintained outside of our joint accounts gave me freedom he hadn't anticipated. I rented a modest office space downtown and began setting up the consultancy I had dreamed about for years. Caldwell Financial Transitions. The name felt right, grounded, professional, and empowering. My first clients came almost immediately. 2 women going through divorces of their own. Word of mouth spread quickly, and soon more women reached out. I specialized in helping them understand their finances during major life transitions, divorce, widowhood, career changes. I gave them the knowledge and tools I wished I had received earlier in my own life. The work was fulfilling in a way my corporate job had never been. Each consultation reminded me that my value wasn't tied to being Nathan's wife or Lila's mother. It was rooted in my own expertise, my own determination. Lila, now living in Charleston where she had accepted a marketing job, called me often. I'm so proud of you, Mom, she said during one conversation. You're helping people through their worst moments. You're showing them they don't have to feel powerless. I'm just doing what I wish someone had done for me earlier, I replied. Preparing women for whatever might come. It was empowering to be needed not for my caregiving but for my knowledge. For once, people were turning to me because I was the expert, the professional, the one who could provide clarity in chaos. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself lighter, freer. Nathan's absence no longer felt like a loss. It felt like relief. He had tried to script my humiliation, but instead, I had reclaimed my story. And though the battle wasn't yet over, the early victories reminded me that I had been underestimated for far too long. Nathan had once believed my trust was my weakness. Now he was beginning to realize it had always been my strength. The final divorce hearing fell on a date that felt both cruel and poetic. What would have been our 29th wedding anniversary? Nearly 3 decades of marriage, and here we were, sitting across from each other in a courtroom, surrounded not by friends or family, but by lawyers, paperwork, and the quiet hum of ceiling fans. I arrived with Richard Hayes, who was calm as ever, his briefcase stacked with binders full of meticulously prepared evidence. By now, Richard knew the case backward and forward, every clause of the prenuptial agreement memorized, every bank statement catalogued. He had been my steady anchor through the chaos of the past weeks. Nathan sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, his posture slouched, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked a far cry from the man who once prided himself on tailored suits and polished charm. His hair was thinner, his tie crooked, his skin pale. The woman he had sacrificed everything for, Sienna Wells, was nowhere in sight. She had vanished from his life weeks ago, leaving him to face the storm alone. The judge, the same sharp-eyed woman from the preliminary hearing, shuffled through the thick file in front of her. Her voice rang with authority as she began. "We are here to finalize the dissolution of marriage between Avery Caldwell and Nathan Caldwell. I have reviewed the prenuptial agreement, the financial discovery, and the evidence presented by both parties." Nathan's lawyer, another replacement, this one older but no more effective, attempted one last protest. "Your Honor, we maintain that the prenuptial agreement, given its age, is no longer valid. Additionally, my client disputes the interpretation of the fidelity clause." The judge lifted her glasses and peered at him, unimpressed. "The agreement is quite clear. Section 12 explicitly states that the fidelity clause remains valid for the duration of the marriage. Section 23 outlines full financial disclosure, which Mr. Caldwell has violated. And Section 18 stipulates that the contract remains active until dissolution. The court finds the document binding in its entirety." Richard leaned over and whispered, "This is it." I nodded, my pulse steady. The judge continued, "Therefore, I am ruling that Mrs. Caldwell shall retain ownership of the family home, her retirement accounts, and 70% of the joint investments. Mr. Caldwell shall retain his personal possessions, his private account, and his business interests. Given the financial misconduct documented, spousal support is denied." Her gavel struck, the sound echoing through the room like a door slamming shut. Nathan's face flushed deep red. He leaned back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing as though he were searching for words but finding none. For 29 years, he had believed himself to be the orchestrator, the one pulling the strings. Today, the strings had been cut. After the hearing, as Richard and I exited the courthouse, Nathan caught up to me in the hallway. His steps were heavy, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Avery," he said, his eyes tired and desperate, "I made a terrible mistake. I studied him, the man I had once loved, the man who had held my hand through miscarriages, who had kissed me under fireworks on our 10th anniversary, who had promised me forever and delivered betrayal instead. Is there any chance we could?" He began. "No," I interrupted, my tone gentle but firm. "That door is closed." He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. For the first time in years, I believed he understood. "I hope you find happiness, Avery," he said quietly. "You deserve it." It was perhaps the first honest thing Nathan had said to me in a very long time. Over the weeks that followed, word spread through our community. Some friends drifted away, unsure how to reconcile their loyalties. Others rallied behind me, their calls and visits full of encouragement. Clara remained steadfast, my closest confidant, and Lila, though wounded, showed strength that made me prouder than ever. Meanwhile, Nathan's life unraveled further. Without access to my financial guidance and stability, his business faltered. The accounts he had once thought were his safety net dwindled rapidly. After paying his attorney, he had barely enough left to rent a modest apartment. The dream of beachfront property, of a glamorous new life with Sienna, evaporated completely. Sienna herself had already moved on. Clara heard through mutual acquaintances that she was dating a real estate developer in Savannah, someone with actual wealth to match her ambitions. I wasn't surprised. Nathan had built his illusions carefully, but illusions couldn't pay for luxury condos or jewelry. For my part, I focused on rebuilding. The house, once poisoned by Nathan's betrayal, began to feel like mine again. I replaced the linens, rearranged the furniture, even repainted the bedroom walls. Each change erased a piece of him and reclaimed the space as my own. More importantly, my consultancy flourished. Caldwell Financial Transitions attracted more clients every week. Word of mouth spread among women navigating divorces, widowhood, or major life changes. They came to me frightened, uncertain, overwhelmed, and I gave them clarity. I showed them how to trace assets, how to protect themselves, how to plan for futures they hadn't anticipated. For the first time in my life, I wasn't supporting someone else's dream. I was living my own. Lila called often, sometimes visiting on weekends. Each time she marveled at the transformation in me. "You're stronger than I've ever seen you," she said once, hugging me tightly. "I'm so glad you're finally doing this for yourself." Her words touched something deep inside me. For years, I had defined myself through Nathan's shadow. His wife, his supporter, his safety net. Now I was something entirely different. Mentor, business owner, advocate. The irony was not lost on me. The very document Nathan had once demanded to protect himself, the prenuptial agreement, had become his downfall and my liberation. On the evening of what would have been our anniversary, I sat alone in my living room, a glass of wine in hand. The house was quiet, peaceful. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the windows. I thought about the woman I had been 29 years earlier, standing in a white dress, vowing to spend my life with a man who would one day betray me. That woman had no idea what lay ahead, but this woman, the one sitting here now, knew something far more valuable. She knew her worth. I raised my glass, not to the years lost, but to the years still to come. The chapter with Nathan was over. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I felt truly free. 2 weeks after the final hearing, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The chaos of the courtroom, the endless legal filings, and the constant tightrope of public appearances had given way to something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. But for Nathan, peace was nowhere to be found. Clara called me one afternoon, her voice tinged with dark amusement. "Have you heard the latest about my dear brother?" she asked. I smiled faintly, knowing whatever came next wouldn't surprise me. "I'm listening." "He's already had to cancel that car order, the one he bragged about to everyone at Christmas. And the beachfront property? Gone. The deal collapsed once the accounts were frozen. Apparently, the seller didn't appreciate a buyer who couldn't provide verified funds." I leaned back in my office chair, letting the words sink in. "So his dream house by the ocean is slipping away?" Clara chuckled. "Slipped. Past tense. He's been left with that dingy apartment and the remains of his so-called business. Word around town is that clients are leaving. Turns out, when you lose your wife's credibility and steady hand, things unravel pretty quickly." I thought of all the times I had quietly saved his ventures, patched his financial mistakes, lent him my reputation to cover his flaws. Without me, he was exposed. "And Sienna?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Gone," Clara said simply. "She packed up her things and left. A friend of mine saw her at a cafe last week, with a new man, of course. Someone from Savannah. A real estate developer. Apparently, she told a mutual acquaintance she didn't sign up for financial drama." I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Nathan had sacrificed everything for her. His marriage, his reputation, his stability. And in the end, she had abandoned him as soon as the facade crumbled. Meanwhile, my own life was blooming. I had poured my energy into Caldwell Financial Transitions, and the results were astonishing. What had started as a modest office downtown was now humming with activity. I had expanded to a larger space and even hired 2 associates, women who shared my passion for helping others navigate turbulent financial transitions. My clients came from all walks of life: divorced women, widows suddenly faced with managing money alone, younger professionals preparing for career changes. Each one carried her own story of fear and uncertainty, but by the time they left my office, they carried tools, strategies, and confidence. The work filled me in ways I hadn't expected. At Trevanta Corporation, I had managed millions of dollars for faceless corporations. But this was personal. Each client wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. She was a woman rebuilding her life, just as I had rebuilt mine. One afternoon, after finishing a consultation, I received a call from Lila. She had just completed her first month at her new marketing job in Charleston. "Mom," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Guess what? My manager complimented my campaign idea today. She said I think like a seasoned professional." "That's wonderful, honey," I said, my chest swelling with pride. "And I want you to know," she continued, her voice softening, "I'm so proud of you too. Every time I tell someone what you do, they say, 'Your mom must be incredible.' And I just smile and say, 'Yes, she is.'" Tears pricked my eyes, but they were tears of joy this time. Lila had always been my greatest accomplishment, but hearing her pride in me, separate from Nathan, separate from the family roles, meant everything. "I'm just trying to help women prepare for whatever life throws at them," I said. "That's exactly what makes you so inspiring," Lila replied after we hung up. I sat for a long time in my office, thinking about how far we had come. Lila was thriving, Clara remained my rock, and I was finally standing on my own 2 feet. Nathan, on the other hand, seemed to be unraveling more with each passing week. Friends who once admired him now kept their distance. The man who had spent years building a carefully curated image was now whispered about in social circles as the husband who left his wife for a younger woman, only to lose everything. Clara mentioned that he had been seen drinking alone at a bar downtown, his suit wrinkled, his face drawn. He was bitter, angry, a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. When word spread that Sienna had not only left him but also moved in with her new partner, Nathan's bitterness deepened. He tried calling Lila, but she wasn't ready to hear from him. His desperate attempts to rewrite the story, to paint himself as the victim, fell flat. People had seen too much. And I didn't engage. I didn't gloat. I didn't send messages or spread gossip. My silence was louder than any words. I had no interest in his downfall. My focus was on my own ascent. One evening, Clara invited me and Lila over for dinner. Lila had driven in for the weekend, eager to see us both. As we sat around Clara's dining table, surrounded by books and the soft glow of lamplight, I realized how much our family had changed, and how much stronger we had become. "To new beginnings," Clara said, raising her glass. Lila clinked hers against mine. "To Mom for showing me what strength looks like." Emotion swelled in my chest as I raised my glass in return. For so many years, I had been cast as the supporting role in Nathan's life story. Now I was the lead in my own. Later that night, as I drove home, the streetlights flickering across the windshield, I thought again about the prenuptial agreement, the document Nathan had once believed would protect him. In the end, it had been the key to my freedom. He had thought my trust was my weakness. He had thought my devotion made me blind. But trust, I realized, had never been weakness. It had been my strength. Because when it was broken, I didn't crumble. I rebuilt. And unlike Nathan, I didn't build illusions. I built something real. As the weeks stretched on, I found joy in the small things. Planting flowers in the front yard. Hosting Clara and Lila for Sunday dinners. Meeting clients who walked into my office trembling and walked out standing tall. Life wasn't perfect. There were scars, moments of grief, flashes of anger. But it was mine. Entirely mine. Nathan's story was spiraling downward, but mine was only beginning. And deep down, I knew this was the truest revenge, not destroying him but thriving without him. 6 months passed after the final hearing, and my life looked completely different from the one I had lived for nearly 3 decades. What had once been a small rented office with one desk and a single computer had blossomed into a thriving business, Caldwell Financial Transitions. My consultancy had grown so quickly that I moved into a larger office space downtown, with windows overlooking the bustling city streets of Augusta. I hired 2 associates, both sharp, compassionate women who shared my vision of helping clients navigate the financial storms of their lives. Each day, I walked into an office that hummed with purpose. Clients came to us frightened and uncertain. Women facing divorce, widows who suddenly found themselves in charge of accounts they'd never touched, young professionals making career shifts. They carried pain, confusion, and fear through our doors. But when they left, they carried knowledge, confidence, and a plan. For the first time in my life, I felt not just useful but fulfilled. At Trivanta Corporation, I had managed faceless numbers for distant executives. But here I was changing lives. I was offering women the very thing I once wished I'd had. A partner who understood. A guide who could cut through fear and confusion with clarity. Tea wasn't just a business. It was a mission. Lila visited often, sometimes surprising me at the office with lunch. She loved to peek in on meetings, watching the transformation that occurred when women realized they weren't powerless. "You know what's ironic?" she said one afternoon as we shared sandwiches in my office. "If Dad had just been honest from the beginning, he might have kept half of everything." I smiled, shaking my head. Sometimes people can't see past what they want in the moment. Nathan wanted freedom and fantasy. He didn't realize the cost until it was too late. Lila reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom. Not just for surviving, for thriving, for turning all of this into something that helps other people." Her words filled me with warmth. For years, I had poured everything into her and into Nathan, often at the expense of myself. Now I was someone she could look up to, not just as her mother, but as a woman who refused to stay broken. Nathan, meanwhile, had faded into the background of my life. Through whispers from Clara and the occasional sighting around town, I learned that his business had nearly collapsed. Without my steady hand to balance the books, clients pulled away. His savings dwindled. He was still living in a modest apartment, far from the grand beachfront escape he had once promised Sienna. As for Sienna, she had long since moved on, attaching herself to a wealthy real estate developer in Savannah. The irony was sharp. Nathan had given up everything for her, and she had abandoned him the moment the illusion of wealth evaporated. Sometimes people asked if I felt satisfied watching his downfall. The truth? I didn't need to. His collapse wasn't my focus anymore. My silence, my refusal to acknowledge him, was the most powerful statement I could make. Revenge had been the spark that lit the fire. But it was reinvention that kept me warm. On the day that would have marked our 30th wedding anniversary, I didn't feel sorrow. I didn't feel regret. Instead, I sat on the porch of my home, the home I had reclaimed, and watched the sun dip below the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Clara joined me, bringing a bottle of wine. She poured 2 glasses and handed one to me. "To freedom," she said with a smile. "To freedom," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then she asked, "Do you ever miss him?" I thought about it honestly. About the man Nathan had once been. The man who held my hand through miscarriages, who surprised me with weekend trips, who kissed me under fireworks. I miss who I thought he was, I admitted. But not who he turned out to be. Clara nodded knowingly. That's the hardest truth, isn't it? Sometimes the people we love were never who we imagined them to be. I sipped my wine, the taste sharp and grounding. And sometimes that realization is the beginning of who we're meant to become. Months later, Caldwell Financial Transitions hosted its first seminar. Over 100 women filled the event space downtown, notebooks and pens in hand, their faces eager. I stood at the front of the room, heart pounding but steady, and shared everything I had learned. How to trace assets, how to read financial documents, how to protect themselves when life took an unexpected turn. When I finished, the room erupted into applause. Women crowded around me, thanking me, asking questions, telling me their stories. That night as I packed up, Lila hugged me tightly. "Do you realize what you're doing? You're changing lives, Mom. You're teaching women not to let themselves be blindsided, not to give up their power. You're everything you once wished for yourself, and more." Her words echoed in my heart long after she left. One evening, months later, I came across the cream-colored envelope I had once placed on Nathan's plate. I had tucked it away in a drawer, a relic of another life. I held it in my hands, remembering the weight of that moment. It hadn't just been a legal maneuver. It had been the key to a new chapter. A chapter one never would have found if not for Nathan's betrayal. I slid the envelope back into the drawer and closed it gently. That part of my life was finished. Now I was Avery Caldwell, mentor, business owner, advocate, and woman reborn. I no longer measured myself by what I had given up or by who I had stood behind. I measured myself by what I had built, what I had reclaimed, and what I had become. And in the quiet of my home, surrounded by the life I had forged with my own hands, I realized the truth. I hadn't just found revenge, that I had found myself. Thank you for following this story till the end. If you found this an emotional journey of betrayal, justice, and inner strength, please help RevengeAmy reach its first 1,000 subscribers. Just a like and subscribe. Your support will be a great motivation for us to continue bringing more inspiring stories. Click subscribe today and be a part of this journey. See you in the next stories.